Callum and Rayla, by the end of Season 4 of The Dragon Prince, have reached what appears to be a sort of reconciliation. But is this truly a reconciliation, or simply another form of the two of them obscuring the problems facing them and facing their relationship? Have they moved beyond the rupture that tore them apart and that caused Callum in particular so much heartbreak? Has Rayla moved beyond her almost perverse mix of guilt and shame at what she did and how she failed to locate Viren in doing it, and steadfast, stubborn self-reliance, her unwillingness to open herself up to others and admit that maybe she is wrong and she needs the help of other people? At the end of Season 4, the status of their relationship is far from clear. I do not find the place their relationship has reached fundamentally adequate as a foundation for either the reformation of their relationship or as a continuation of how the relationship was in the past. And I think this is in part intentional for the show. Of course they can't go back to the way things were. They cannot lean into this romanticized, idealized view of the past wherein they cling to this Ruskinite view that they can go back to this time of perfect cohesion and perfect unity and perfect unalienated clarity in action and thought. They can't do that. The rupture has happened. Nostalgia is not going to solve it. They need to go onward. They need to try to reforge their relationship, but they have not yet been sufficiently honest with themselves and with each other that they have thought about where the relationship is in such a way that they can resuscitate that relationship in full light of the changes that they have undergone as people and in full light of the darkness that has clouded that relationship. It needs to be confronted instead of merely ignored. At the risk of once again disappearing into philosophical opacity, I am going to bring up Heidegger here, the German philosopher, and specifically I'm interested in Heidegger's notion of idle talk. For Heidegger, idle talk is basically gossip, but it's a broader category than that. It includes what we consider gossip, but also a lot of other forms of everyday communication that don't really matter in that they have no weight to them, no fundamental, foundational significance, but they do serve experientially, phenomenologically, as a way to distance us from the raw, pulsating vibrations of the issues and components of our experience of the world that we would rather not confront. They create these layers of distance, of remove. This is, importantly for Heidegger, something different than what Nietzsche objects to, or even what Kierkegaard objects to, in terms of there being this mass of people who refuse to engage in serious introspection and just go about accepting the superficial moral precepts of the world in which they find themselves. There is a part of that in Heidegger's idea of idle talk, but it's much less malicious and much more pernicious and latent than that. It is a stage of experience and of interaction that we all tend to fall into. Escaping it is impossible. We can't simply go our lives without running into some sort of idle talk. And also for Heidegger, who is far less of an arch-individualist than Nietzsche or even Kierkegaard, it is not the case that social interaction inevitably, innately tends toward this muting distancing condition and has few positive properties. That's not the case at all. Heidegger is equally skeptical of the concept of the single solitary individual cut off from society, which is kind of what Callum was, even as he was elevated to such a high role in his society. Having Viren's old position, he still felt that emotional isolation and that emotional unmoored drifting from the experiences of others, in part because he had lost Rayla and he was not able to move on from her. He remained with a level of disconnect between him and the bustling experiences of those around him, even as he also attempted to distance himself from that chasm-like loss. Rayla was even more isolated. She appears to have been quite alone throughout her journey, throughout her experience trying to track down Viren. She was not successful, of course, but that does not mean that she was unsuccessful for a lack of trying. Though we don't know a lot about Rayla's adventures throughout these past 2 years, and I think that might have been a little mistake on the show's part, Rayla is nonetheless quite relentless in her pursuit of any goal. This relentlessness, exaggerated to the point of obsessiveness, also serves as a distancing factor. Being alone can be as distancing from the truth as being in a crowd of people, but in a different way. Rayla and Claudia, in particular, are similar in that they revel and wallow in this obsessive monomania because they don't have anyone in this 2-year time gap to pull them back from these extremes, to modulate these extremist impulses. Yet, it is also the case that simply physically reconnecting with other people is not enough to bring this kind of emotional and experiential reconnection. Connecting with others is important for Heidegger. All being for Heidegger is being in the world, and that means being with each other. There is no singular solitary self apart from the vicissitudes of experience. That does not mean, in a Lockean sense, that the self is constantly simply a bundle of sensations, but it does mean that the self is always in flux and is always in the process of transformation, processing and absorbing the sensory responses of every passing moment and integrating those into the basic concept of the self, the basic concept of who one even is. This is inevitable. And to try to cut oneself off from that world of experience and to ascend to this plane of pure rationality or pure devotion that exists in an abstract, isolated way is for Heidegger a mistake. All knowing, all learning, all understanding is to a certain extent communal, especially in relationships that can be very close and can be so revelatory to both parties. So, in this Heideggerian paradigm, there is nothing innately wrong with this relationship between Callum and Rayla. There's nothing that innately says that such a relationship cannot bring wisdom and understanding, but rather the relationship fails at the current moment to bring such understanding because they remain on the level of idle talk. Idle talk is what we talk about when we're not talking about the things that really matter to us, the things we would prefer not to think about, the things we might prefer not to exist. And yet these things need to be confronted, or else we're stuck living in a world of illusions, a world of these distancing, superficial, fading impulses that simply cut us off from the pure content and the pure soul of our experiences. So Rayla and Callum need to face what is really important to them. And I do not think they have quite done that yet. They have made gestures toward such a confrontation, but ultimately their series of interactions in Season 4 are simply an evolution from Callum's bitterness and not wanting to talk to Rayla to Rayla demonstrating that she is still clinging to this self-sacrificial ideal that has caused both Callum and her so much strife in the past, and is for Rayla not just a noble gesture, but a way to distract herself from real interpersonal communication, to ultimately their relationship progresses toward this kind of reconciliation. Sort of. They're kind of back together, sort of. But regardless of how back together they technically count as being, their relationship does not feel healed yet. Because the kind of healing requires not just acknowledging the problems in the relationship, and not just acknowledging how difficult it was for the two of them to even think about trying to repair that relationship, and especially the contrast between Rayla's, at one level, acknowledgement that she was not the person she thought she was, and that maybe it wasn't the best idea to run off, and yet her complete unwillingness to really confront the implications of her decision, and Callum's lingering bitterness that is perhaps understandable considering how Rayla betrayed him and left him like that on his birthday, but nonetheless is also a block or obstacle to healing. The two of them need to be able to delve in a region beyond idle talk and ruminate on the issues that matter to them and matter to the future of this relationship in a way that is not judgmental but is thorough, in a way that accurately analyzes and comes to terms with their experiences of each other and of this relationship as a mutual creation of theirs, instead of relying on oblique, semi-illusory abstractions that refuse to confront the real fissures in their relationship or think about how those fissures can be not just bridged over, but really contemplated and really worked with and really navigated. They need to think about how they can respond to the failures of their relationship before to create a new conception of that relationship that is stronger and more supple. I hope they can do that in the future seasons of the show. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and you want to see more videos like this before anyone else does. Tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon, that I promise you. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.